Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. This meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Continuing Education Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. Happy New Year, everyone. And the time is 12:31 p.m. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, engagement, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the committee taking action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. We will now take roll call. Dr. Adams, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Dr. Paris?
Present.
Dr. Adams, present. Dr. Daniels?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 2, review and possible approval of December 2nd, 2022 committee meeting minutes. I would open this for any discussion amongst the committee. Questions, comments, any changes?
I motion that we approve the minutes of the December 2nd CE committee meeting, December 2nd of 2022.
And I second.
Any further discussion from the committee members? I have no questions, comments, or changes. Moderator, would you please open this for public comment?
We are now accepting public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Quick reminder, you'll get 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. And we're going to take another 15 seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Please, thank you. Dr. Adams, would you please call roll for the vote?
I will. Dr. Paris?
Yes, approved.
Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
And Dr. Adams, yes. Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay. Moving to agenda item number 3. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding proposal to mandate basic life support or cardiopulmonary resuscitation certification for licensees. And Ms. Walker, would you please provide the staff report on this agenda item?
Might help if I unmuted myself, sorry. So as noted in the meeting materials, effective November 21st of 2003, the board had adopted a regulation that required all licensees to maintain current certification in CPR or basic life support as a condition of licensure and license renewal. Then in 2007, the board repealed the regulation based on reasoning that there had been no positive impact on the level of care provided by doctors of chiropractic in the 3.5 years since that regulation took effect. The other reasoning was that other boards had repealed their CPR requirements and that the board lacks authority and expertise to approve associations to provide CPR or BLS training. Then in 2015, the board began discussions of re-implementing a CPR or BLS certification requirement for licensees as a matter of public safety, because unlike many other healthcare professionals, doctors of chiropractic primarily work as sole proprietors, and they should be trained and certified in the proper procedures for handling an emergency situation that may arise in their practice. That culminated in the July 30th of 2015 board meeting, where the board approved proposed language to amend California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 371, and then to also add Section 371.1. That language that was previously approved by the board is included in the meeting materials under Attachment 1. And then after that language was approved, the proposal was placed on hold pending the completion of the board's CE regulations. So staff recently reviewed that language, and we have 4 recommended changes for the committee's consideration today. The first of which is to mandate basic life support level training and certification for active licensees, as BLS courses are the ones that are specifically designed for healthcare providers and public safety professionals, while general CPR courses are generally intended for members of the public and those without any formal medical training. The second recommendation is to remove the reference to other associations approved by the board from the previous language, as it's vague and it was actually previously cited as problematic during the prior repeal of the regulation. Instead, the board could consider mandating that the courses be approved by the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, or offered through providers approved by the American Safety and Health Institute, ASHI. The third recommendation is to require that licensees retain their records of BLS certification for 4 years and provide them to the board for auditing upon request, very similar to the requirements for retaining the CE records. And then the fourth would be to hold off on amending Section 371 at this time, as the licensing committee is discussing other matters that will potentially affect that regulation. So at this time, we could consider moving forward with a regulatory proposal to implement the BLS requirement, and then later on as a second phase, as we update our licensing processes, we could add a certification question to the applicable application forms. So the staff recommendations are reflected in updated draft language to add Section 371.1, and that's the language that's found within Attachment 2 of the meeting materials. As far as today's meeting, staff is requesting the committee's feedback on the recommendation to mandate BLS level certification for active licensees and that draft language found within Attachment 2. And then as far as next steps, if the committee agrees, we would like to get the board's approval of the regulatory concept at the January meeting. And then following that, we would work with regulatory counsel to finalize the proposed language to reflect the discussion and feedback today. We would also then prepare the fiscal analysis and draft regulatory package to implement the proposal based on final language. And then at the April board meeting, we would plan to present the final language and analysis to the board for the final approval so we can proceed with the regulatory process. So with that, I'd like to return it back to the committee to discuss the staff recommendation and that proposed language within Attachment 2 of the meeting materials.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the background information too. I think it was really helpful, especially the statistical information from the MBCE and the information that our occupational analysis. Is there any discussion, questions from the committee members?
Yeah, I had a couple questions.
Please.
So the first question is, are we concerned about any sort of physical disabilities or physical constraints from licensees? Just trying to be sensitive to that. I couldn't really think of anything as far as, anyway, so I just wanted to have a conversation about that as far as requiring the BLS and the physicality to do that. Are we concerned, or do we need to address any issues as far as someone with physical disabilities? That was my first question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Um, i- Ms. Walker, is there anything in this language that would allow us then uh, those licensees with disabilities to defer
Well,
Or
there
be,
was,
or be
there was,
exempt?
or be
or
exempt?
I mean, I thought there was a section that talked about it had to be, which I'm totally fine with, had to be in person, providing the physical thrust. So it's more kind of around that. I mean, um, and maybe it's within the realm of the BLS, and if they have uh, adaptations for that for somebody who goes and say they can't perform the thrust. I just want to make sure the language is not prohibitive. Like if somebody goes to the class but they can't perform the thrust, but BLS or whoever it is certifies them, um, then that would be fine. I don't know if I thought it said someplace about being there physical and physical thrust, and I just don't want to exclude anybody based on that.
The question I would have in response to the committee is so with the previous language, there was just a kind of a vague statement in there, if you will, that the requirements would not be interpreted in any way that violates the ADA. We didn't include that in this draft language. What we would need to determine is with the more recent language that's there, like you said, it would require an in-person. You'd have to be able to demonstrate that you can perform those thrusts to get the certification. What we would need to determine is whether if you have a licensee that's not physically able to do that, what would the alternative be? Would they need to have a member of their staff that's certified that could also perform that, or would it be acceptable that they wouldn't, if there was that emergency arising in their office, they're potentially not able to perform? We could carve out some sort of exemption, but we would have to figure out what we would want that to look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's value there's more to it than the thrust, right? There's recognizing signs and, all the other things. So it's not just about that. So, I mean, if they attended the class, but they couldn't perform that portion of it, and that's a good question as far as does somebody in their office need to be designated? So I'm not sure how the other members feel.
This is Sabina. I think we can also take a look at how other states or other health care boards handle this issue. And these entities who do the certification might already have something in place for to deal with different types of disabilities. I'm not sure, but we can definitely explore how other healthcare boards handle this as well as other states.
Yeah, and I think that could be temporary too. I know we're thinking of it as, somebody ADA and maybe a more permanent disability, but if somebody has, say, shoulder surgery, they might not be able to do, to comply with the resuscitation portion. And I will say there's one more thing too. The AHA, American Heart Association, has a program, and it's called Heart Code. And in Heart Code, you do most of the hours online, and you kind of click through the options as you go online through Heart Code, and then you test. This is actually how I do my CPR at the facility I work for, and you test on a voice activated mannequin, and so there really is never actually an in-person like instructor. That's built into the voice activated mannequin, and and then the Heart Code system is pretty unique in that as you get questions wrong, it brings those questions back again to assure the learning. So you kind of repeat the items as other online educational platforms do. But so I'm wondering if we're not leaving us the flexibility here to allow for that technology in CPR, especially recertification. And these large systems, they have just a dedicated room, and there's just a voice activated mannequin, and you get a code after you complete heart code, which is the online portion. And then you go in and you have a login and a number, and that certifies you've done the online portion. And then the voice activated mannequin takes over from there. And I will say, as far as public protection, and it really is a unique system because the mannequin is actually measuring. You're seeing it on the screen versus, when you have an instructor, they're kind of eyeballing it. And a lot of the mannequins, maybe some of the newer ones, they can measure it in a computer, but some of the older mannequins don't always measure the actual depth of the compressions or how much you're inflating the lungs. And I mean, it's down to the millisecond as to whether or not you're in the range that they want you to be in. So my suggestion would be that we allow things like the heart code program to satisfy the hours and the certification. And it's AHA, so I think we'd have some conflicting language if we didn't.
Yeah, I think including that is good. And the new mannequins, actually, they do have a sensor on them. So if you're not compressing completely, it lights up. So the new ones are better.
Yeah, this is even more than the old, the ones where if you have to go to a certain depth, this is like, are you in the range? And it's, your watt is pretty, it's pretty slick, actually. I never thought we'd do it virtually. It was one of the things I couldn't envision many years ago, but here we are.
Well, I think whether you do it in person or do it that way, it would be viable options. I don't know that we should, hardwire it that it has to be in person, that it can be in person or it can be virtual as well, particularly in light of this technology you're talking about.
Can we list kind of all the options and then people can just pick, just making sure the language is not exclusive to what is available?
As far as the format or the types of courses?
Well, the types of courses, making sure that we're not excluding the online version.
Yeah, we'll take it back and clean up some of the language, because where it talks about having the live in-person and hands-on skills assessment, we can clean that up to where it's just a skills assessment, but would include, if it was more of a distance learning type activity where you were just in there with the mannequin that Dr. Paris described.
I think that makes sense to have those options because technology is getting better and better.
Yeah, and you can do it anytime. I mean, it's pretty neat.
I personally like that option. It was always a pain, the other when we had to do that for a while there because you had to, find a place and, Anyway, as far as the first comment about the ADA concerns, I think it's kind of goes. I think it makes more sense to work in language that basically says, rather than get caught up in the minutia of language, if a person has a physical disability, because I can think of a lot of people that I know that are very good chiropractors, but if you want them to get down on the floor and bend their knees and perform thrusts and CPR in the chest, they're probably not going to be able to do that. So I think that we probably have some language in there that allows for people to have the training and pass it, but then also either disclose. I think making a staff, because then you run into the same thing, and that is that, well, what if that particular staff is not there that day, or the doctor's the one that's trained, but the staff aren't trained in CPR, and the doctor's out that day, and somebody's coming in. I just see that we could really get caught in the weeds on a lot of this. I think it makes more sense to say that if a person is going to be exempt from CPR because of disability, that perhaps then they have to, put a disclosure in their office that because I mean, right now, what do you do if you're in that situation and you're not trained? You're going to call an EMS system to come into your office. That's what we're doing basically now. So it seems that, perhaps some people that may not have the physicality to do it, but are solo practitioners, we're going to make them have a staff, or we're going to exempt them somehow. It seems like we could really get in the weeds on that. So maybe we need to have something in there that says that, I don't know, an opt-out option, but you're, at your own risk, or you have to disclose that you're not CPR trained, and that therefore, if an EMS needs to be activated, that, this is the way that we do it. I mean, if that was our purpose to do this, was that chiropractors are many times solo practitioners, and it's good for them to have that skill, I can see then at the same time, well, if I'm a solo practitioner and I don't have the staff there, what do I do? What's my culpability? And can a person conspicuously display something that says, we don't have, so therefore we're exempt? Or I don't know how to do that language, but it seems like we've got to look at the possibility that we're opening ourselves up. If we're saying this has to be done, but then we're giving outs, then is it they get trained in it but can't perform it? They still have to call the EMS system anyway. So slippery, could be a slippery slope.
And I'm wondering if they don't have the AHA, American Red Cross, or the ASHI, if they don't have a way that they provide a certification of sorts, like if they haven't already addressed this issue, where you can still get like a limited certification based on your abilities, things like that. Because I've been in the room where people have declined for different reasons to, get down like on the floor, whether it was shoulder, knee, hip, whatever it may be. And that they still get a certification, but I'm not aware of the process. So I think we need to maybe look back to those certification bodies and see how they might still go through the program to the best of their ability. That way they're certified. I know that doesn't answer the question. Well, I mean, I think it kind of does.
Well, I think if we're going to mandate that they have this training, but that then they can't physically perform what they're being trained in, then I think, and maybe this is where Sabina needs to chime in, is that then if we're mandating something, then there becomes a culpability factor, right? I mean, that's where we come in as a board, and the protection of the public, is that then we also have to think about our licensees, and that is that we have to look at, say, if we're asking them to do something, but then they have to have that certification, and then they can't physically perform it, what culpability do they have if an emergency situation arises in their office, they can't perform what needs to be done, and they get sued because they're trained but didn't perform? You can see there being a slippery slope that we've mandated something that they can't perform, and then somebody can say, well, you were trained in this, but you didn't perform it. Well, I have a physical disability. Do we as a board, I don't know that we can give an exemption, because then we're assuming the responsibility in those situations. So I think it can be a slippery slope, and I don't know the answer. And perhaps Sabina can shed some light on that. She already did by saying, let's find out what other boards are doing, and maybe that's what we need to do. But I think that's something to think about. If we're mandating something that can't be performed by somebody due to their disability, how does an exemption work, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, this is Sabina. So remember, the mandate here would be certification. So
Yeah.
you're not mandating one that they act when they're supposed to act, or be a good human, or be, however able-bodied you might think is able-bodied enough to act. So if they receive a certification, then they've met the requirements. Now, the question is, can you be certified if you have some kind of physical limitation? I don't know. So, you know, if your requirement is just for them to go through a certification process and to be certified, then absolutely we can. I think the question goes back to the certifying entities. So, are all types of disabilities accommodated? Do they have a different type of course for those who can still be certified, or do they have limitations and say absolutely not? We do not certify these type of disabilities. I don't have the answer to that, right? So,
I think we need to find that out because,
Yeah.
as Dr. Paris said, I mean, I've been in classes where people aren't necessarily performing the thrust, but they pass the test, and you know, I see them get a certification. So I think we need to go back to each entity and get a better understanding of kind of what the exceptions are, how do they handle ADA, so that we have a better understanding of what we're requiring and asking of people and what it means.
Absolutely. I think that's this. I'm sure the staff is taking wonderful notes, and we'll be happy to go back and contact each of the certifying entities and get that information and see how that's all handled. And, you know, if everybody can get a certification, then they fulfill this mandate, you know, regardless of any type of disability.
My final comment is just that I think the language looks really good. And other than just making those changes about the ability to have be in person or virtual, in light of what Dr. Parrish brought up, I think that's the only exception. Everything else, I think, language looks good.
So I did have another question, I think, for Ms. Walker. I just wanted to clarify how we're handling inactive licensees with this requirement. On page 2 of agenda item number 2, it says complete continuing education equivalent to that required for a single license renewal period. And I just wasn't understanding what that means as far as if someone's inactive for a couple years and then they go active. So that's one question. Then the other is, how are we handling this potential CPR training with, are we requiring inactives to have it? And then how we're thinking of this for restoration of licenses, canceled, forfeitures, et cetera. I was wondering if you could maybe kind of clarify that. And my last one was, I believe we were considering this for 2 units for an elective, but not for any other category of the required CE. So that's my final question.
Sure. So as far as how we're so with the proposal in attachment 2, it's to mandate, and we'd want to confirm that the committee's in agreement, but to mandate the basic life support level certification for all licensees who hold an active license. So anybody that has an inactive license, or if the license is in forfeiture or canceled status, they're not subject to that requirement. And that's kind of phase 1, if you will, would be to implement this requirement, educate licensees, let them know that if you hold an active license, there's this requirement out there that you have to maintain your continuous certification, and you need to retain those records for 4 years and provide it to us if we were to audit you. And then as the licensing committee is working on 371 to clean up some other areas of like the inactive license holders and different processes, when we get to that regulation, we would then insert language to clean that up a bit so that when someone goes from inactive to active, in addition to giving the 24 hours of CE, they would provide proof that they're currently certified in BLS. And then same with the restoration of a forfeited or canceled license, we would add that requirement that you demonstrate proof prior to restoring the license, but it would only apply to those holding an active license. And then and as far as the CE, the way the CE is structured, we've got language in there that's pointing back and forth to the two regulations. So there's the pursuant to Section 361, Subdivision D2, that licensees would earn a maximum of 2 hours of general, it would be general CE credit as an elective hours for completing the BLS certification. And then within the CE regulations, it points back to that they would get the 2 hours in the year that they completed the certification towards their CE requirements. So the reason it's written that way is that they wouldn't have to repeat the course annually, because generally those courses are valid for 2 years. They just need to stay up on it and renew it as it comes due and keep records, so that if they were audited, if it happened to overlap within a renewal period, they would give us proof of both, like the certification that expired and the current one they obtained.
All right, thank you.
So I have a question to add on to that then. Have we considered having them upload that as part of like the CE record, and that will go into Connect eventually?
It could, yeah. That's one thing that we could implement in the future, especially through, this would just implement the requirement, but then when we look at 371, that outlines the renewal process. So there's the potential there to implement something that, we're obtaining the records of CE at the time of renewal, and that they upload a current certification. I don't believe there's any way for us to electronically receive the information directly from any of those organizations, but we will check, because we're already going to be contacting them about the other question about the accommodations that they make. So we can check, because if there's some sort of way that they can give us records direct access, then we wouldn't need to request it from the licensees. So we will find that out as well and report back.
Thank you. Any other discussion, questions from the committee members?
Did we need to circle, I don't know if it's relevant or not, do we need to circle back to the difference between 2003 and I think it was 2007 with, I think the two comments were there was no measurement of change. I'm not really sure how they measured that. And then the other was that, I can't remember the language you used, Ms. Walker, but the board doesn't have the authority or knowledge of evaluating a course, which to me, we're not. We're relying on the agencies that are providing it. But I didn't even know if we needed, those were concerns at all for the rest of the committee.
Not for me. I think this is important, and I think it's in the interest of public protection. I think it's something DC should have BLS training.
I concur.
I think, too, sadly, I think we watched an NFL player get his life saved by, CPR and just recently. So I think it's really ever present, timely that we're considering it. Okay. Any more discussion questions from committee members? I have one thing, and it's just a clarification for me. It seems like the staff reviewed the language, and then one of the bullet points, I'm on page, where am I in the packet? Page 3 of the packet. It says replace, well, let me just go to the language in the attachment. But it seems like the ASHI is kind of carved out. And I'm wondering, are they not like an organization like AHA or American Red Cross? I was familiar with them a few years ago, but I can't seem to recall. Or do they just certify individuals?
So the ASHI, they certify providers that then deliver BLS courses. So that's why there's a little bit of a differentiation there in the language. It's a slightly different approach than what AHA and ARC take, where it's more direct, and you get the certification card right from that organization. We will, while we're contacting those agencies, we'll make sure that that language is kind of reflective and accurate for the final text.
Because and the reason I'm asking then, so that licensee would have certification via ASHI, not David Paris, and then you've got to find out that I am a ASHI certified provider, and thus my certifications are good for license. Does that make sense?
Correct. Yeah, it's I actually would have to double check and report back what those certifications look like compared to the other two organizations. We're trying to provide flexibility there for licensees to be able to access a wide variety of courses. And then also eliminate kind of the issue that was cited back in 2007 about the board not really being in the position to approve all the different organizations that offer BLS. So we're trying to be more specific, but then still flexible enough that we're not mandating one specific entity. And that ASHI is the one that they provide the certification in addition to AHA and ARC, and they are generally found to be comparable programs.
Yeah, that was my concern, that we were not leaving ourselves the opportunity to include, other certification groups outside of those three into the future. And I mean, that's taking away a little bit of flexibility, maybe, potentially. Okay. Any more discussion questions from committee members? I think I'm good. I don't have any.
Not for me.
Okay. Hearing none, moderator, can we please open this agenda item for public comment?
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 3. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, and I don't believe, do we need a motion here at this time, or is this going to go back and we're going to bring back that?
No motions required. Staff will research and look into the issues presented by the committee, and we'll report back.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. And moving to agenda item number 4, review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding proposed changes to the annual continuing education requirements for licensees and the board's CE course review and approval process. And Ms. Walker, would you please provide us the staff report?
Sure. So as the committee is aware, over the past few meetings, we've been developing and discussing the regulatory proposal to amend CCR Title 16 sections 360 through 364, which would update the board's the annual CE requirements for licensees, and then also update the CE course review and approval process. Just to provide a brief recap, as far as the annual CE requirement for licensees, that 24-hour requirement would remain the same, but licensees would be required to complete a total of 10 mandatory hours in 4 new competency areas, the first of which is evaluation and management. The second competency area is documentation, record keeping, and coding. The third competency area is adjustment, manipulation, or technique. And the fourth competency area is ethics, law, and professional boundaries. The remaining 14 hours of CE credit can be obtained through completing board-approved courses in any of the 5 competency areas, including competency 5, which is general electives, or through other professional development activities that have been outlined in the proposed text for Section 361. The committee also had discussed allowing CE providers that have been recognized through the FCLB PACE program to apply to the board for approval of their courses. The course approval process itself, the committee has been discussing gathering additional information from providers during the application process, moving to a 3-year approval cycle, and implementing a new reapproval process for previously approved courses. Within the meeting materials themselves, there are quite a few attachments, so I'll just briefly summarize them. The first of which is some draft proposed language. Any substantive changes to the language since the committee's last review in December have been highlighted in yellow. Let's see here. As far as ones to highlight, we've got under subdivision D3, it reflects the committee's discussion of granting credit if they complete the course in sexual harassment prevention training to grant credit for competency 4. So that language has been added there. There's a little bit of changes to the language under subdivision F to provide a little bit more flexibility in the types of courses that would fall within the competency areas. That's why we've included language such as one or more of, and the inclusion of the word or, so that if a course is focused on just one topic within that general competency area, it can be approved rather than requiring that it include each of the elements included in that definition. We would like a little bit more feedback from the committee, again, on competency 5 electives. We're kind of narrowing down that list, but if there's any additional feedback, it's welcomed for the different examples that we've included within the regulation itself. As far as 362, we've added an additional paragraph there that's prohibiting providers from making changes without first seeking the board's prior authorization. Looking at section 363, which outlines the approval of courses. Not too much was changed there based on the discussion at the prior meeting, looking at subdivision C, where it talks about the documentation that needs to be submitted with each new course application. We did add a new subdivision C2 requiring that they provide a list of a description and citation to the journals, studies, publications, and other materials that were relied upon in the development of the course content. So that's something that we'd like the committee's feedback on whether to keep or remove. We also included a statement there for a description of the provider's method or system for tracking course attendance and participation. And then also a section for the name of the individuals or organizations that have underwritten or subsidized the course. Getting in further into section 363, we've just kind of added some additional language in subdivision H, outlining kind of the process for if there's been any substantive changes to the course, how you would submit an application for approval or authorization from the board to make those changes. So those are the items to highlight within the language itself. And then the other remaining attachments are all proposed or draft forms for the different processes. The first of which, under attachment 2, would be the new CE provider application form. And then based on the committee's feedback at the prior meeting, we did include some questions there about some of the background information on the key personnel within the provider. So the oversight contact person, the designated representative, and then individuals that are in control of the program. We are going to need to do a little bit more work on when we talk about who's in control of a program. We're going to need to define that further, but it's kind of included there in draft form right now. The third attachment is the renewal application for a provider. So similar to the initial application process, there's the question if there's been any unreported changes to the entity. If yes, there's that request for authorization form that would need to be submitted with that application. If no, they would just complete the certification questions there. about within the previous approval period if there's been any convictions or discipline against those involved with the provider entity. The fourth attachment there is the request for authorization of changes to the provider approval with the different types and some information they can provide to the board so we can review it. Let's see here. Getting into attachment number 5 is the new CE course application. So this would be the form that would be filled out for the initial approval of a course. It would include everything from the provider's information, a contact person for that application so we can reach their staff. Also, they would select one competency area because the definition of a course is just a single competency area. However, they can select any of the course learning formats that would apply for how they're going to offer the course. They could provide course dates and locations on the form, the instructor's information. Then there's in section 6 of that form, there's the required documentation where it includes a list of all of the documentation that's outlined in the draft regulation. And then following that, section 7 is actually a certifications section. So the provider would also certify to all of those statements to make sure that they understand the regulation. The first of which is being that the course content and materials are current, relevant, and based on the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary for the competent practice of chiropractic. And then they would continue with each of those statements, certifying that they're aware of and will comply with those. And then they would submit that application form with all of the attachments outlined in section 6. And then along with that, there's attachment 6 is the CE instructor attestation form. No changes were made since the committee's last review of that form in December. Attachment 7 would be a form for requesting to change the course dates or locations. So this would be if a provider has an approved course, they would fill out this form for us to either add or remove dates from the calendar, or if they change the location, they could complete this form and process, and staff would make the changes accordingly. Attachment 8 is the request for authorization of changes to a CE course, and that would be if following the either initial approval or reapproval of a course, if a provider was seeking to make changes to that course, they would go through this process to provide us with the relevant documentation so we can make those changes, and they can grant approval prior to those changes being implemented. And then finally, attachment 9 would be the application for reapproval of a CE course. And similar to the same process as the provider form, they would provide basic information there, and there's a question, and they would provide the dates for the courses. There's a question there if there's any unreported or planned changes to the course. If yes, they would attach the request for authorization for those changes, and then they would outline those changes on that form. And then based on the discussion at the last meeting, there's also a question of, have there been any updates to the reference materials relied upon in the development of the course content? Yes or no? If yes, provide us with an updated list of those materials. And if no, provide a justification for the response. So that justification could be that there's been no changes or there's no new information relevant to this course, but including that. And then section 3, again, having the provider initial to confirm their agreement with the statements within the regulation, specifically that the content is still current and relevant, and then all the other different aspects that are within our regulation. So that's kind of a brief overview of each of the forms contained in the meeting materials. Also at the December meeting, the committee did request to continue the discussion on 2 topics. The first of which was the potential of granting CE credit to licensees who conduct research. If that's something the committee would like to include in these regulations, we would just ask for a little direction on the parameters of what would be acceptable, such as whether it has to be a peer-reviewed journal. Is there a maximum number of hours that the committee would like to grant for licensees that were conducting the research? Is it based on the date of publication? Would you get credit for working on it during a renewal period? So we would need to set the parameters. And then the other topic that the committee expressed that they wanted to continue the discussion on would be the verification of attendance during live and interactive courses given via electronic means. So on pages 13 and 14 of attachment 1, which is the proposed language, there's subdivision F6 and F7 that they address the verification of attendance for an in-person course and the course that's given through live and interactive means. So if he wants to make any changes to that language, or if you have any feedback, we could entertain that as part of that discussion. So as far as what we're looking at for the meeting today, we're asking the committee to discuss those two items, the granting of credit for research and the attendance verification method. And then also if there's any additional feedback or direction on overall on the draft language and the forms, we'd like to discuss that with the committee. And then for next steps, if we can finalize the proposal, we would like to have that presented to the board for discussion purposes in January. And then after that structure has been confirmed, we would work closely with regulatory counsel to finalize the proposed text. We would work with the budget office to develop the fiscal analysis and potential options for fee amounts based on the staff time and resources that would be involved in each of the different processes. And then we would want to present the final regulatory proposal and fee amounts to the board for review and approval at the April meeting. So with that, I'd like to return this item back to the committee for discussion.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot there. Appreciate that. Well, let me open this up for questions and discussion by the committee. I believe Dr. Daniels had raised the question at the last meeting regarding CE for conducting research.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any questions or discussion on that?
Yeah, I can start off with that. I had a bunch of sort of notes on the attachments as well. Yeah, so I was thinking about how we would define the language for accepting research for CEs. And so I'm kind of on the same page with Ms. Walker. There's kind of a lot to sort of pin down, and I do feel like that's a broader topic, but, you know, just kind of shooting from the hip as I've been thinking about it. I mean, you know, what we need is really more peer-reviewed stuff. People can say that they're doing research and they just, you know, a case study can be research, but it needs to be, to me, submitted to a journal and accepted and peer-reviewed. I mean, that's what's going to add to the profession, not just saying, oh, I'm doing some research and it's not peer-reviewed or it's not documented. So that's kind of my mindset on that. As far as like data publication, I think if someone performed research and it was accepted, to me, it's the date of acceptance by whatever the journal is. So those were kind of two off the top of my head. But I do feel like we need to have a bigger conversation on kind of what qualifies as research, because I feel like a lot of people say, oh, I do research, and it's not really qualifying for top level, you know, research. Because to me, what we're looking for is what's adding to the profession. And that needs to follow pretty strict guidelines to be involved in sort of the community of research.
If I could just jump in, I think what would be best in the interest of today, because we do have a lot to unpackage here, and I think, you know, based on just even what Dr. Daniels said, she's got, you know, some notes about other aspects. I think it would be best if we perhaps tabled that particular item to a future CE meeting, because there's a lot to unwrap there, and really focus our time on the regs that we've really brought together. I think the staff has done a great job in putting this together, and I think we should unpackage that, and hopefully in the next hour, you know, vote to approve the language that's here, and then hopefully get this, you know, this moving through, because my fear is if we don't get what we've spent a lot of time on this and get caught up on other stuff, we could just be kicking this can further down the road. And I think we've got a lot of stuff here that we could get wrapped up today and get moving through this process.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, it's a bigger conversation. I think we can kind of, think about it on our own and do some research on our own as far as what we want that conversation to look like. That's, yeah, what I was implying.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay with me, and I think I do agree with your thoughts on initially at least that it would have to be an indexed, peer-reviewed journal publication. And my second thought is I know that a lot of time and energy goes into these, so I'm in favor of it being reflective of that for the amount of CE we at least especially general CE that we might give somebody for doing that. So, but thank you for bringing that up. I think it's kind of an important item that we don't allow licensees to get CE for currently. So we'll discuss that into the future. And the second, discussion topic was the verification of attendance during live and interactive courses given via electronic means. Any discussion or questions on that?
I mean, again, I don't know if that falls into if we need that for this particular package. I mean, because that needs to me, it needs to be defined, like camera must be on, 80% of the time. There's like certain things as far as, a person wrote in and how they do it, I think is, really good, but there's some leniency with camera, someone's camera being on and stuff like that. So do we need that language for what we've done so far? If not, we may want to, as Dr. Adams say, kind of get through what's here and then talk about it. Or if we need it, then I'm not sure where we're at.
I think the one thing about the attendance is that, to the public comment that was sent in, there are a myriad of ways for people to do it. I mean, I think the way that when I was teaching via Zoom, worked really well. There was a login, there was a log out, there was, questions along the way so that people I would not go back. If someone said, oh, I missed that, it's like, well, then, you can miss 2 questions, but, I can't go back and give you that word because you said you missed it. So, because I don't know whether you were, there or not. So I think the challenge is that, like even on our own Zoom meetings, we've had some challenges with connection. So we've had to turn off our camera to make, it functional. So I think there's a lot of ways that it can be done. And I think to specify everything in there could end up becoming a limiting list as opposed to, so I like the idea of what the staff has put in here, that we put the onus on the provider to track that, and the instructor on behalf of the provider that that just like there's a sign in and sign out sheet when we do CE in person, that's being tracked as well. The online, in fact, I found to be much more requirement heavy than the CEs that happen, in person, because, people step out at different times for bathroom, stuff like that, but they better be there for the quiz. They better be there for the questions that are asked during the course of the exam, or they're going to miss out. So I'm kind of in favor of the provider that is, when they submit their course, they put down how they're going to be taking attendance, how they're going to verify it, and then the requirement that they provide a copy of those verifications to the board upon request, if required for verification of attendance, kind of like how we're doing it now.
Yeah, I always think of it, and I don't I agree with you. I don't know that we want to get really granular with defining some of this. But I think in general, I always think that you kind of have to, the assurance in my mind is that it's triangulated somehow with like a sign in, sign out, login, a quiz of some sort. That really is just a check in because I don't know that they need to keep score and grade these, but and then having some sort of assurance that they're present, on the camera maybe or something like that. So but this is surely not my wheelhouse, and I know some of the other committee members have much more experience here. So I would defer to any other discussions or suggestions you may have.
The only reason I brought up, I mean, the cameras, I totally hear about connection issues, but you can have your camera on to check in. You can have your camera on to check out. That shouldn't be a problem. And if there's an extenuating circumstance, there's a chat you can type into. But I do think we should define it because it's been brought up on some of the online classes with an offhanded comment of, oh yeah, the board doesn't seem to care if you have it on or not. So I bring it up as that it's been mentioned, and I do think that we should either get on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence, but I do think that we should be saying what we're expecting so that everybody's on the same page and it's not perceived as that we are not defining, what we want and care about the licensees participating in their education.
I agree. I mean, I'm okay with if we want to add a language that says your camera has to be on 80% of the time. I mean, I don't know how that you're going to verify that other than that if you're going to require every provider that provides that is going to have to videotape, because that's the only way to verify that it's on for that set amount of time. That's the only way I know how to do it. Because, I mean, fortunately for me, I've taught a number of Zoom courses and I've never lost my connection, but I know there were people that were on the course that lost their connection. And the way that the provider, made up for that was that that there were multiple people made hosts so that I wasn't the only host, because if I'm the only host, then the whole thing goes down. But if there's 6 or 7 people on the Zoom call that were designated as hosts and co-hosts, then if I went down, I could log back in and everything's back on track. And if other people, fell off, they could log back in. So I think our providers out there are wanting to do the right thing. I think that those things are in place. I think, if to Dr. Daniels, your point, if we want to put in there, that, hey, we hope that your camera's on, or we require that your camera's on 80% of the time, there's always going to be some people that are going to try to game the system. There always has been, there always will be. But I think for the most part, most of our licensees want to learn. They want to do the right thing, and so do our providers. And so I think the requirement for them to, in their application, to say how are they going to take attendance, and then the board can certainly verify, okay, you said you were going to do it this way. We agreed to that application. Provide us with the evidence upon request that you did just that. Show us your sign-in sheet. Show us your sign-out sheet. Show us the quizzes, the questions for the quizzes that were taken along the way. So I know that, as you all know, I teach, a course for Back to Chiropractic Systems, which is the provider there is Marcus Strutz, and my course was changed so that I could do 14 to 16 questions throughout my 6-hour course, and it proved to be beneficial. I found, and it found most of the people keeping their camera on. I can't, cover when there's 100 people in there. I can't see every single camera while I'm teaching, but I know that he can. When he goes back and checks the log, he's got a system that he's got in place that enables him to see when people logged in, when they logged out, if they logged out, in the middle of it and log back in, how long they were logged out. But I know he spent a lot of money on that particular software, and I don't know that every provider is doing that. So some may want to do, the old, paper in hand thing. And I think if that's what they're going to do, then they should be required to provide that evidence. If they're putting that in their course description of how they're going to track it, they've got to make sure that they produce that upon request. Rather than getting granular, as Dr. Paris said, getting real granular about it, we just say whatever you put, and if the board approves it in your application, then you need to back it up with the paperwork to show that you've done it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would kind of agree with you too. I think there's we're just naturally going to have somewhat of a learning curve here, on our end as to what will be brought to us that may be just fine but different. I know for me it would be really hard for me to define, that technology and the ability to. So, I mean, I think the only other option we would have is to, as a board or have staff, look into, how other boards or online educational services are using this, and maybe have some of those options brought back to us, and we could discuss those. I don't know, any other thoughts or comments?
Well, I would just recommend that if we're going to do that, that we then, leave our language open enough that we can give the staff the room to do that. Because if that one thing becomes a sticking point that causes us not to move this down the road, then I think we're doing a disservice to the work that's been done by staff and what we've done. I think sometimes we worry too much about the few exceptions than we do about the majority of our licensees. And I don't want to just always be thinking that everybody's going to try to game the system. So we've got to try to, cover all the T's and dot all the I's for every possible thing that a licensee might do to get out of it. Because I think by and far most of our licensees, are wanting to learn and are willing to. I mean, Dr. Daniels, you attended that seminar. Did you feel like the quizzes that were given, the 16 questions that were given during the course of the 6 hours, was sufficient enough to warrant, if people passed that they got the attendance, that was sufficient, or that was good?
I think the random questions throughout the class ensure that somebody's there enough. And I don't think it's so much about worrying about what the licensees are going to do to gain the system, but I just know it's been brought up, and if the board doesn't have a opinion and just a definition where the providers can look to, it does create a little bit of confusion, so to speak. So it's not to be micromanagey, but it's to make sure that we have our definitions clear, that it's in the package, so that the providers know what they're instructing their students to do. And because that has been a question, at least as far as the camera, and it was as if the board hadn't, basically didn't care. And so we need to make sure that we have enough clarification without micromanaging or getting in the weeds with it.
So the language that's there, I feel like it addresses that. So established measures for licensee participatory interaction, including participant attendance reports, in-content quizzes, participant polls, real-time participant audio and video requirements, and records of participant login and logout times. Providers shall retain these records for 4 years from the date course of the completion, and shall provide copies to the board within 30 days from the date of the board's written request. So do you like that language? Is that language that you can go along with it, or should we add to that, real-time participant audio video requirements? Would we want to put in there our recommendation that it be 80% or more? Or I don't know what to do to not get, to get too granular, to use Dr. Paris's great word.
Yeah.
I feel like that says what it is that we want as a board, and submit that. And when they submit their course, they need to address those points. And if they say, oh, we're only going to require 20 minutes, our staff can say, well, that's the board would like to see a higher amount. They'd like to see a minimum of 80%. That can just be something that the staff says when they submit their course. If they say, 50%, we're going to say, the staff can say, no, the board, if that's our intent, we say that. We tell our staff that, hey, we want it to be, your requirement for checking attendance needs to be 80% camera on.
Ms. Walker, is the language that's there with the conversation that we're having, is it clear enough to the staff as far as what's approved or what's not approved and what follows the guidelines? So, just talking about camera on or camera off.
So the language that Dr. Adams just read is clear to staff. We do need to clarify, though, the committee's intent, because we may need to narrow our definition in, I'm trying to find the section right here, in subdivision, very towards the beginning, A3. The definition of live and interactive courses given via electronic means is a little bit broad there, and it actually allows for an audio conference to qualify. So if the committee's intent is that any of these live interactive courses need to have the video component, we need to tighten up that definition right there. And then beyond that, then the committee's and eventually the board has put the intent right there that you're participating with video. And then, of course, there's requirements for the provider to, inform participants on how they would address any technical difficulties, but that would put the intent right there. If it is truly that for now it has to have a video component, because we can always, if some other technology arises in the future, we can make a few further adjustments. But if the intent is that these live and interactive courses have an audio and video component, a live stream like that, we can adjust that definition there to reflect that intent.
And so that would allow for just audio if that's the class, and then it would allow for when you are doing audio and visual that there's a certain percentage of the camera being on.
Well, so the way it's written right now, it's broad. So if someone wanted to have a teleconference and they were going to, discuss a research topic and you were just listening to it audio and you had a phone connection where you could make comments and go back and forth, it would be allowed under this current language. If we want to narrow that further and require that it have a video component, we can put that in. We'll just update that definition to reflect that. So it's kind of up to the committee on where you want the bounds to be. I think by narrowing the definition of what it qualifies as the course is probably the best route, because then it would reflect the intent there that there is a video component, rather than having to stipulate the amount of time on the camera. We can carve out, technical issues aside, you need to be on camera participating in this course.
And so to the other committee members, does it matter if, say, each licensee did all their classes without video interaction with the instructor? Do we care?
I do. And I'm more, that's actually a good catch in my view, because I think the original intent going back in these conversations to, how long we've been working on this and all the concerns and discussions we had were of, we were taking this from face to face, live, and now we're talking about audio only. And I think one of these sticking points was of doing technique in this fashion. And I think that's just the easiest example to use of why we, wanted the video portion, that was the assurance that you could get a camera up close and you could see these things closer than you could in a big room. And then I think when we look at the four subject areas, and that was also part of the discussion we had in making it this live and interactive, with the E&M component, et cetera. So I would be supportive of adding that language versus getting very detailed into the percentage of time. Because I will say I have been on calls where you go off camera naturally. There's maybe experiential activities going on or something like that, and so I think there should be a check-in, but there should be video, as a mandatory component.
That was my intent. So good catch, Miss Walker. If that's something that fell through there, because that my intent was always that the idea of the video conferencing was that people were participating via video. They're just, in a sense, being able to do it from their living room as opposed to being in a room, in a hotel. So whatever we have to do to make sure that the intent is that there is a video component to these classes.
I mean, that was my goal because it wasn't clear to me. And again, I don't want to overregulate or get in the weeds, but it wasn't clear to me. So it's fine.
Well, good catch. So yeah, I mean, if that to me, if that's what it takes to define it, then the assumption is that this, either you're there in person or you're on your video, not just audio alone. Obviously, if there's connection issues, that's one thing, but the intent is for video to be there. So let's make that change. And then I think the language in 7A then can be left to the providers to say what they're going to require. And then the staff, when they're looking at the application, can say, well, the board's intent is that, this is a video conference. It's not like you can be in the room in the hotel and then be outside the room. You've got to be in the room. You get your breaks and you get your time to go do things. But obviously the majority of the time you are face-to-face in the room. You're expected to be face-to-face on a video camera.
Okay, so we'll tighten up the definition there for the live and interactive courses to reflect that with that video requirement, and then we will likely then update distance learning to kind of move audio components into that sort of, it would be distance learning. So we'll make those adjustments to the language. Beyond that, with the language there requiring, so we'll narrow that definition, but with the requirement that they demonstrate their attendance tracking method at the time of application. And then we have that language outlining the requirements for the participant, the interaction and the login and logout times. Is there anything further on that topic that we need to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be in all of the above, kind of like we've done in other sections. It doesn't necessarily have to be all of the above, but they need to submit when their application is that here's a reasonable way we're gonna keep attendance. So at the minimum, perhaps a login, a log out, and participant roll call during the course or something like that, or a quiz or whatever. But it doesn't have to necessarily be roll call, quizzes, all of the above per se, but it needs to be a combination of some of these things that are going to show basically that you're verifying that people aren't just logging in and then, sitting around doing nothing. So there's engagement.
So. Yeah, I just have a quick comment on that. Like when I saw, it was on page 14 of 18, just a log in and a log out, I don't think that's sufficient. So when you go to an in-person, you sign in, you leave for lunch, you sign out, you come back from lunch, you sign in, and you leave and you sign out. If there is no test throughout the course, I think those 4 logins are a minimum. But if they have a test throughout the course and Right, so we, as Dr. Adams saying, we have a couple options, but they have to fall within something that's reasonable. But I don't think it's reasonable for just a log in and a log out. I mean, you see that in live classes. They go out for 8 hours, they come back and they sign out. So the, if you're not having a test, I think you need 2 more logins. But whatever their method, it just needs to be defined and reasonable.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's lots of ways to get through it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think with the instruction to staff that's listening in, that when an application comes in, you kind of know what our intent is. That's why we don't want to get too granular, but we're also going to we're not going to just let you be willy nilly. So the staff also knows that you've got to do better than that. That at a minimum it needs to be this, but best practices. This is best practice, and the staff can convey that to providers. The word will get out. Hey, listen, you can't just do this. The staff of the BCE is not going to just rubber stamp stuff. You better come in with your a well-defined application and a course and have your T's crossed, your I's dotted, and have a good course outline and so forth, which I think you guys have done a great job as staff of outlining. Let's step it up a little bit. A lot.
So just to kind of move this forward a little bit, is that the language as written acceptable for the committee members?
It is for me, based on our discussion, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And knowing we're going to correct a little bit more, defining on the fact that our intent was, video conferencing meant, face to face via the video, not just, listening in.
Okay. Yeah, I think with the 2 last topics that we talked about, I think the language is great, besides just cleaning those 2 things up.
So is there any further discussion or questions on that, or is there any further discussion questions on the forms themselves?
I had a couple.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, just real quick, I was wondering, I did have a question on page 3 of 18. It was just, I know there was a discussion around it. I thought we decided on something different. 8 hours of continuing ed that includes hearing a case, or I thought there was some discussion about just a regular board meeting without cases qualifying. So I didn't know where that was left.
If I recall correctly, that's one of the outstanding items that we didn't get any changes from the committee on. If we want to grant, because moving to the new model, especially in this calendar year, only 2 of our 4 board meetings are even going to have petition hearings. So anybody attending in January under our current regulations doesn't actually get any credit because we don't have petition hearings scheduled. So we can remove that and simply grant credit for attending the board.
Well, I thought it was actually Dr. Paris that brought up giving people credit for attending without a hearing to get people more involved in the board meetings.
I don't recall. I don't recall. I know sitting here, right, I think the petitioner hearings are really vitally important to like public protection. Like if you were going to attend a board meeting and could only do half the business side or the while I think the other board business like the budget, et cetera, is important, but I think for the licensees and reflecting on practice and public protection and regulation, I think the petitioner hearings are really important. But I don't recall. I may have said that. I'm sorry. I don't remember. I'm sitting here today. I'm supportive that they attend the petitioner hearing. So just to be clear.
Yeah, I'm more inclined with how it's written that it's the petitioner hearing aspect. I think there's more value in that. So that I'm along those lines.
Okay. My other was on page 5 of 18. Can we add electrodiagnostics like EMG, NCV to C? I think
Okay.
that's yay, nay.
Where are you? I'm sorry.
Of the packet,
Number 4,
page
right?
5 of 18, it's under C, diagnostic testing procedures. Electrodiagnostics aren't listed, and I just didn't want that to be excluded.
Good catch. I think I agree
No,
with that. I agree with
really
that.
good point. Thank
Okay.
you. I actually have notes there because I thought the same thing. I was wondering, it seems like the language is a little bit limiting in that section and probably a non-substantive change, but I was wondering if we could broaden it to be more reflective of like advanced imaging and diagnostics, because it also doesn't note like ultrasound and like diagnostic ultrasound and uh, so I think
It needs to be broader, like, because
yeah, I think
there's more technology coming, so I feel like we need to have that specific, but also more open.
Yeah, I
yeah,
concur. So what
yeah.
was that? I like the way that I like the language you used, David. That is what do you say? You said how you used it. You said, he said,
Advanced,
but I thought it was good. Advanced, that's it.
advanced
Um,
diagnostic imaging, yada,
yeah,
yada.
other advanced imaging and diagnostics.
Yeah, because all those are going to fall under diagnostics.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about electives too, if we circle back to our intent many moons ago, it was that we brought in the ability for DCs to have, the ability to get continuing education for, things that are, maybe outside of the scope of practice, but important in patient care, et
Sure.
cetera. And so that just seemed kind of limiting. Thank you for bringing that up, by the way.
I like that. What does that sound good to you, Kristen?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for competency 5 electives, it is very broad. And then what that list there is just intended to be examples. I think it's not quite working that we were trying to kind of keep the prior language there. As you can see, we've kind of struck through certain things and we're just been trying to change it. We might want to just consider narrowing it down to a more a very shorter list, kind of like what you see in the other competency areas. But I think that's what's still not quite working well, because we had a discussion about competency 5 at the last meeting, and then here it's still not quite there. And I think really the intent is just with elective courses, it's other than the 4 main competencies that are mandated. It's to allow for flexibility. You can actually discuss multiple topics during your course. It'll get approved. And then it's just giving a list to provide some guidance to instructors, but it's not meant to be, when we get the applications, we're not going to be reviewing them and saying, well, they're only, they're focusing on 3 of these items, so it's different courses. We're not going to be doing what we currently do under our existing regs. So any additional updated or just succinct terms that you think would be good under competency 5 are certainly welcomed by staff, but I think we might need to do a little bit more restructuring there, because I think we're limiting ourselves just on trying to preserve that old language a bit.
Well, yeah, and I don't want to delay this getting moved to be able to vote on in the full board, coming up, which would be nice to move this along. I just think the one concern is that if we do leave stuff like that sometimes, is that I'm thinking, what about 20 years from now? I mean, I'm thinking of how long this took to get done. It'd be nice to, to get, that clarity now, because I would be concerned that 20 years from now, if there's a staff person that goes, well, it doesn't say NCV or EMG on there, so therefore your course isn't approved. We know the current staff is going to know our intent, that it's meant to be broad and not exhaustive. I'm just thinking 20 years from now. So I'm thinking the more broad some of that language can be. And I think we have to give examples, because if we don't give examples, then people don't have that direction. So it's kind of a, come see, come saw. We want to give examples, but we're trying to also say they're not exhaustive. So we don't want anybody. So I mean, I always kind of think back to that language that we use, that, including but not limited to, kind of allows that open up, that our intent is and such like, type language. So
There's also, upcoming and current, more advanced gait analysis systems that are becoming more readily available financially and user friendly. And I imagine there's going to be classes on that. And I would hate to have that technology not included as well. So I do think we need to think, 20 years ahead as far as how do we give examples for providers to understand what we're looking for, but also not be limiting to different types of technology.
Can we change that language there in C, Ms. Walker, that says like diagnosis of all conditions that affect the human body, including but not limited to application of X-ray. Just change that one little word because we're giving examples of computerized tomography, or do we need to put electrical? Diagnostics is diagnostics. It's very broad, which is good.
We can take either approach on that language because right now it's kind of creating an exhaustive list, so we could add to the list, or we can come up with a term that's more broad. This is more of a general question that, not to put any of the attorneys on the spot, because we can also take that discussion offline, but I'm wondering if, since we've defined what electives are and that it's the other and what's acceptable, if we can just come up with a concrete definition of electives and then provide the guidance to providers via like the website as just simply guidance and examples. Like these are some courses that, these are the areas that are approved, or if we have to actually provide the examples in the regulation.
So Heather Hoganson, your reg counsel here. I would caution against doing something like that for fear that you enter the underground regulation territory. I know that the Office of Administrative Law is kind of touch and go on lists that are, including but not limited to. If they are examples, then OAL has been more inclined to accept them. If they're just general statements, then they have asked other boards to define them a little bit more. And if there were examples that were then put, for instance, in an initial statement of reasons that these things would qualify, then OAL has said, why don't you just put that in the regulation then, so that anyone looking at this, if they're in Kansas 5 years from now, they know exactly what the board will and won't accept. And that just letting staff know an intent is seen by OAL to be more underground. And they're, that's less transparent. So in the interest of transparency, if there is something particular that we could add, that would be a great thing to add to the regulation right now.
Okay.
Good suggestion.
So I'm still, forgive me, I'm still a little unclear. So is it best for us to broaden the language and get rid of the specific examples, just so that we know that it's advanced imaging and diagnostic testing procedures, interpretation, and technologies that aid in, and then a period after that affect the human body? Because we're not limiting. It's CE, and they could go to any healing arts board and get CE for any of the other. We would approve it through any other healing arts board if it was some advanced technology and bone density or blood flow, or whether it's an ultrasound or am I missing? I feel like we would just broaden that definition, because I think our intent was to allow them to obtain CE in other areas of healthcare, even outside of necessarily what might fall under the chiropractic scope of practice. So I don't understand why we just wouldn't leave that as broad as imaging technologies, and then define it as just that aid in the differential diagnosis of all conditions that affect the human body.
I don't think you get much broader than that, right?
Yeah, and I think the limiting is just that it's that aid in the differential diagnosis, so we know it's applicable to patient care.
Yeah, I'm with you. Whatever's gonna get it through. I mean,
I don't think there's anything wrong with adding the examples that are listed there right now. Because that does, if you're asking about giving guidance to someone about what would or wouldn't qualify, I think this definitely gives them some guidance as to how narrow or broad you have to be. But if you wanted to narrow it even further or expand it even further, you could do that too.
would we state examples are, and then list those things and then add NCV, EMG, diagnostic ultrasound? Would that be better?
So, all right, so you'll have the MRI, the computerized tomography, and then ultrasound,
Yeah, like diagnostic ultrasound, NCV, EMG.
I think that would be great.
But we're not going to be limiting, right? It's not like if 5 years from now we learn something, that there's some new technology and it's not specifically listed there, does that mean that it's excluded?
No, because it's that phrase is started off with such as.
Okay.
And so you are stating the board's intent because this list isn't including but not limited to. And then some examples. So today's examples are this. Tomorrow's examples might also include a couple of more things. Yeah. And at some point, if someone says, hey, you really ought to include this brand new crazy thing that we haven't even heard of yet, you could add just that in a rulemaking if you wanted to, or you wouldn't have to. It would be up to you.
Okay. Well, then I'm in favor of that. Just to add those things, those electric diagnostic things. And it sounds like that the OAL likes specificity in examples.
So are we adding including but not limited to the language?
Well,
That's
she said
at the beginning of 5.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
And then we're just giving examples, and then we're giving more examples. We're just expanding examples of other things that could be along the same lines of what our intent is. I like that. So that would be my recommendation to staff, is just add those 3 things in there. Add in their diagnostic ultrasound, add in NCV and EMG. And that kind of covers the electrical diagnostics that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, you could throw EKG in there for that matter.
Yeah, I think the concern was that I kind of see it now. So I'm sorry, I was holding this up there. But that, 5 kind of covers the broader context, and then, C is just going to have some examples such as. So I think as long as we add ultrasound and Dr. Daniel's concerns, I think that's an exhaustive enough list.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that sound good, Kristen?
Sounds good to us. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Any other thoughts, suggestions, comments?
Yes.
Please.
It has to do with a continuing ed provider, the renewal application.
Page.
It's agenda item 4, attachment 3. I don't see it. Oh, it's BCE 201 is the form. This one was small, but I was just wondering, I mean, I love all the applications. I thought they looked great. I just had a couple of things. One was wondering if we want to add a section under the provider renewal application to please list any new updates to previous education. And I'll sort of feed into why I was thinking that. On the application for reapproval of a continuing ed course. I had a couple questions on the provider's website was optional. I was wondering, why is that optional?
It doesn't have to be, we can mandate it. The idea behind marking that as optional would be, we're envisioning when we get to more modern course search functionality, the provider could have the option of providing us a link so that we can include it on that search. If for some reason they didn't want to include it, the optional would cover that, but we could just mandate that they provide the website and we would include it on the course search. But that was the thought behind that.
Okay. And then is this the reapproval continuing ed course? Is this the proposed application for at the 3-year mark where they're reapplying for approval? Is that what this application is?
That's the reapproval application for the course would be attachment
9.
Attachment 9, and then if they've made changes to the course in that time that they want authorization for, they would also complete attachment 8 and attach it to that application.
Okay, so my only feedback, like I love the form, my only feedback is on page 3 of 4 of attachment 9. It says, have there been any updates to the reference materials? And I feel like, to me, that's not a question. It should be what updates have been made to, because I mean, I thought the whole point of going 3 years was that was a reasonable amount of time to kind of teach the same thing. At that point, they should be adding. So for me, I feel like, unless I'm misunderstanding, we should be asking for what are those updates, for a list of those, so that we can see that the material is somewhat been updated. I don't know what the other board members think.
You know, I've struggled back and forth with this, you know, because I think of, you know, like, you know, basic courses versus advanced courses. And I think some basic courses, you know, may not have necessarily updates that are every 3 years, but you know, I don't know. I think that's the spirit of it, but I don't know that that's going to apply in every situation, that there's going to be, you know, I mean, there may be new studies, but there may not be new, there may be new studies that have come out, but just citing a new study per se doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing the application. It just may mean,
for me, that's the intent, that there's some demonstration that this material might be the same, but that I've done a literature review, I've looked or whatever, and here are 5 new studies that apply to the class. I mean, and also, what have you taken off the class? Maybe they found something that's no longer relevant and they're deleting it from the class, but that would be an update, right? So it's not that there's necessarily something new. But for me, I don't think it's unreasonable to be adding some sort of, that you're thinking of the material differently, even if it's the history of chiropractic. There's so much that you can look into the current literature about how people thought of Purkinje fibers and then how they're thought of now. I mean, you can have history as your base that is unchanged, but that, you know, to enhance the education of our chiropractors, if they're just learning the same thing every single time from a class, I just don't think that's, I mean, I understand it can be frustrating, or that we need to define it. And it's not like we're asking for a book review, but to me, to show that there's been some thought into the class that is keeping the licensees up to date, whether it's, you know, I did a PubMed review and this is what I found listing the attachments, or this is no longer true, I've deleted that. I don't know, I just feel like the question of have there been any updates, people will be like, nope, check. Class is the same for another 3 years. And then we have gone 6 years with a class being exactly the same. I don't, so I'd like more feedback on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That our hope is that there's some improvement in the courses and the knowledge as we move forward. I think 3 years is a fair amount of time to ask people to reassess, especially when they're presenting scientific material. No shortage of that. I'm not sure. And I think it's fair to ask them to, update the references for the courses.
Yeah.
Surely. Ask for a current and note that, when they were updated. I'm not sure how we mandate that or monitor that if there isn't, maybe perhaps there really isn't, or how, and if they have one study or, in 3 years versus, 5 and
so maybe, I guess the best way to do that is that if they send in an application that says nothing's changed, then maybe that's where we can step in as a board. Maybe that's where that can be referred to us, and we can, call that provider and be like, okay, so in 3 years, what you're saying is that you haven't done a PubMed search. There's no new studies out there on ABs. There's no new epidemiology studies on wellness. There's no studies that you can cite that show that, that they've learned a little bit more about, fat and carbohydrates and proteins. Is that what you're telling me? Maybe that's, and that message can be sent, that your applications for renewal has been put on delay because in 3 years you haven't done anything. That's going to send a message that the expectation is that and so that will cause that to happen rather than us, I guess I'm just looking at it from a standpoint when we say, what have you done? Maybe that's the best way to do it. What have you done? And if they come back and say, I haven't changed anything, then it gets kicked to one of us as a board member. We can call the provider and say, hey, your application's come in, the staff has reviewed it. You've stated that there's been nothing new, or the staff, I guess, can make that call. I'm just trying to think of what we can do to minimize staff having to spend time on something, but yet get what we want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want it to be punitive for the provider and I don't want it to be laborious for the staff, but I did an online class. I know better because I've been looking things up, but it was not up to snuff. And it's just something that has been regurgitated over and over again. So I would like to encourage us to find a balance between pushing the providers at least to add something, not being punitive. And I don't know, you guys have been doing this longer than I have, but I don't think after 3 years that's unreasonable to have, you're just changing a few slides, adding a few references. You look at the date, 2023, 2025, but if you're still using unless it's a landslide substantial paper, you're not using anything over 5 years. At least you're not supposed to be. So, and you can use a 2012 paper if it's referenced 5,000 times and it was a landmark paper. But, after 5 years, you're skating on thin ice unless that paper has some sort of, substantial change in the scientific community that is still holding up.
Yeah.
So those are my kind of concerns of how do we strike a balance, but still make sure that we're, ensuring good education.
So just to clarify, Ms. Walker, so is this kind of internal procedure, like moving it to a second level review or something like that versus?
I mean, well, as far as this question itself, there's no issue with us changing it to just a requirement. So instead of asking the question and then depending on what your response was, you're either going to give us the new reference materials or justify your response. We can just simply we could change it to something along the lines of describe any updates that have been made in the course since it was previously approved, and provide, an updated reference list and the description. We can just require that be maintained. And then if for some reason, in the rare occurrence, they're working on something that hasn't changed and likely will not change in the foreseeable future, it's still relevant, then the provider could attach some justification. And then likely we would be reaching out to one of the members of the committee to say, is this correct? But more likely than not, we would receive the justifications from the providers of, I've reviewed my course, there's these new studies, this is what I added, and we would use that information to process the reapproval.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good for me.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that satisfies.
Any other discussion, comments?
Sorry, one more.
Go ahead, please.
Last one, I promise.
Nope.
On the new continuing education course application, so not the reapproval, the new one. It's BCE 203. Anyways, I know there was somebody who wrote in that was concerned about it as well, about making competency 2 a requirement. So first of all, just in the language, the way it's written, I don't know if it should say and/or coding. The way it reads to me is that all of them need to be included. I don't think that's the intent. I don't know if that matters grammatically. But is there enough classes out there for the licensees just on documentation and record keeping and coding?
I would respond yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're not like limiting what's available out there. I know it was a public comment on the concern, and
I think even more so now that we're going to, live interactive, and I just saw a CE provider posting that he's moving his CE offerings to monthly. So
okay.
I think, to me, in my view, I think there's plenty of opportunity. And I think we see a lot of these issues. So I think it's important. I think this comes up in enforcement, and yeah.
I agree. I just I'm not in the whole world of what's available out there. And so I just wanted to make sure that we weren't making something required that's not as readily available.
And it may be an opportunity for our continuing education providers also, if there is less offerings out there in this competency than maybe is needed. I always have a feeling that, that they'll show up.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot more players coming in, which is good.
Okay. And then on the course dates, do we want to add times, or is that something that we don't need? It says course dates, location. I don't know if we needed times. I mean, like 9 to 5, or is this just for internal review? It's not really concerning the licensee.
We could collect that information. Currently, we don't. And then same with the in-person courses, we actually don't even currently collect the street address. We just collect the city and the state. So we can add that if the committee wishes, or we could keep it with just the date and the location. Kind of the intent there is that we need to be able to verify where the course took place and audit if necessary. And then it provides an additional benefit for our course search system that we're going to update, where, the more information, the better, because it makes it easier for licensees to actually use that system to locate courses. But it's kind of up to the committee whether to mandate it from providers or just provide it as an optional field. There's want to use us to advertise their offerings.
I think we should have that. We should know the location and the time. Yeah, that would be my thought. I think that's important.
Wouldn't that be included though in the requirement for them to provide a copy of the final syllabus and marketing material? That's already part of it?
Potentially, but what they typically do is they submit the application and we review it at the time of approval, but then they can add additional dates. So we wouldn't necessarily know what time or even the street address location of where they're holding the in-person seminar. So we could add an additional field to the application and collect it.
I just thought that they had to provide that to you prior to that being done anyway, though. Isn't that, am I missing that with the documentation they have to provide to you, with the advertisements and website and link and all the other stuff?
If they're making changes, we're not if they have an approved course and they have it listed on their website and they give us a link saying, this is where I've advertised it. If they add additional course dates with the times on it, we wouldn't be aware using this form unless they specifically reported it to us, because we just don't really have the bandwidth to check each of the courses to find out what time it's at. So we would either have to, if we want to know the information, collect it during the application process, or otherwise just not include it in our records.
I know, I understand that, but I just was under the impression that if they added those dates, I thought I remember reading in here that they had to advise the board of that additional aspect. No?
The date, but not the time. We could add another column to collect the time of the course.
Oh, well, I mean, does it matter what time? As long as it doesn't exceed 12 hours? I mean, can't they do it at, I guess conceivably they could do it at 12 o'clock to 2 a.m. if they wanted to. Does that matter?
It's really up to the committee if you want to collect that information from the providers or not. For staff, it hasn't been an issue. For the courses that we've audited, we haven't encountered difficulty finding the course or the time. But if we wanted to collect additional information up front, we could add that to the form if there's a necessity for us to know the time that the course is being offered in our records.
But that's what I'm saying, is that when they make the application, I mean, they may not know the time. When they may not know the time they're going to do it yet. Isn't that fair to say?
Correct. Yeah, that's one that would be the downside of requiring that they provide the time, is that we would probably get a lot more forms requesting changes to their schedule.
Right. Yeah. That just seems like more work.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, okay.
If they don't know the time, it would be an incomplete application. That just seems like a waste of staff. And if they got the date they're going to do it, in the city they're going to do it, then the time they want to do it should be less of a concern. So
It just popped into my head. It was more of, I've heard staff having difficulty getting in touch with like providers or where they're at. And, just as a licensee, I didn't know if they say the class is 9 to 6 and they change it. So, but I don't want more work for the staff. So if it's not important or hasn't been necessary, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, we're getting close to our time, so I have no other questions. Can we make a motion and allow this to come to the full board in a couple of weeks?
What's your motion?
Or do we still have to do rewrites?
Can't you make a motion with just the few rewrites that we wanted?
That's what I'd like to do. I just am checking to see if we can do that.
I think we can, Ms. Walker. Are those non-substantive changes?
They are. My recommendation would be for the committee to move forward the concepts and the structure of this program and with these draft materials to the board for discussion and approval. And then we would still need to do the final second level legal review where we get the final text that we can actually implement, and we could bring that in April. I think it's a good idea, though, to present the committee's work thus far to the board to make sure there's no concerns and that there's agreement to move this direction. And then that way we can solidify this with concrete language. So yeah, we can go to the board. It's just there will be a little bit more editing to the language itself before it's finalized. But this would be a step in the right direction for us, because then we can go into the fiscal analysis and put together the actual costs associated with these processes, assuming that the full board agrees to move forward in this direction. So yes, there could be a motion. I just would caution against a motion to approve this language because we're not quite there yet, but to maybe discuss the proposed changes themselves at the board for January and then approve final text in April.
So is it reasonable to have this tidied up and voted on April if we move it forward how it is right now?
Yeah, that gives us plenty of time because we've got all the pieces in place. It's just a matter of making sure the language is sufficient and writing the justification and encountering any other little hiccups that we might find along the way drafting the regulatory proposal. So it's close enough that if the board agrees with this structure, we can present final text in April with fee amounts and then begin the regulatory process. And I think it's to the board's benefit or the committee's benefit to have the board discuss where we're at this stage, so that if there's any additional questions or if there's not agreement on the direction, we can resolve those issues before doing the in-depth fiscal analysis that's involved in coming up with the fee amounts.
Right.
Well, whatever you say gets us ready for April, that's what I'm in favor of.
This is Sabina, if I may interject. If you would like for the full board to consider your changes that you made today, let's include that in the motion to recommend to the full board to review the draft language. It's not, obviously, it's still a work in progress. So I think we can include those changes into the motion so that we can move the next version of this language for consideration for the full board.
My motion is what Sabina just said.
And I will need someone to kind of go through and just kind of highlight on a high level each of the recommended changes that we hit on. I have some in my notes, but I'm sure my jargon and language is not proper, as I'm not the expert in this like you all are.
Well, okay.
I do have my notes about the competency, the language we spent a little bit of time on. I do have those, so we would definitely, our motion would definitely include those, and then.
So that was competency 5. We added,
yes.
To subsection, I think it was C.
Correct.
We added NCV, diagnostic, ultrasound, and EMG, and we can throw EKG in there, I guess.
Okay, yes, I have that in my notes, and I think everything else was not that substantive. I think there was a lot of little things here and there, and then everybody else seemed to accept the rest of the highlighted changes.
And then we had the other about the audio, the visual.
Right. That's right.
Component. I think that was substantive.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So
that was the definition. That was firming up the definition of distance learning versus live video conference learning to be reflective of our expectation that it is a video camera on experience, not just audio.
Perfect. Great. So I have the recommendation to the full board to consider the draft language as presented today with the previous edits to the audio and video distance learning, as well as the edits to, as Dr. Adams just listed, to competency 5.
That would be my motion. Thank you, Sabina, for your help.
Sorry, anytime.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion from the committee members? Hearing none. Moderator, can we please open this agenda item for public comment?
We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 4 and the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. And we have a request from Delan Packard. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning.
Here in California, so it's been good to hear some things that good things that are happening. I appreciate those things. One comment, I don't know if you saw the question that I posed when I first got on. I didn't know this meeting was happening today. I called the board because I was notified of some fee changes to our CE credit, specifically to the application for each CE credit. That would obviously be then passed on to the doctors who are going for those CE credits. So I'm understanding that there's a $116 per hour fee increase. I learned from talking to Valerie at the board that that's already been implemented, and I'm wondering why that decision was made. Thank you. Essentially what that money goes towards.
Yeah, thank you for your question. This forum is receiving public input on today's agenda items. So committee members will not necessarily respond to individual questions, but if you want to provide your contact information to the moderator, and board staff will reach out to assist you further. Again, thank you.
Next, we have a hand up from Victor Tong. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
This is Dr. Victor Tong. I just want to say that I'm glad that we are clarifying some of these video requirements for the webinar. In the past year, when I have it, a lot of people are abusing it, even though, you know, I think your viewpoint, your direction would help me as a provider to monitor it. In the past, I have seen people treating patients during a webinar. You literally see the camera with the table behind it, there's a patient there, and the doctor is moving back and forth. My seminar in the past mandate the camera to be on, or else they don't get any credit. So with your move, it would really help me to enforce them. But there's one thing I want to share with you guys too. I have also seen people with the camera on, they are driving outdoor, they are visiting Home Depot while we are having a seminar. That's not interactive. I also flag them and I show them that, hey, I have screenshot that you're at Home Depot. You're not really doing what you are supposed to do, which is an interactive learning. So whatever language that you put, I think it would help us a lot. But the 80% I wouldn't really encourage them, because once you say 80%, that means they're going to take the 20% off. That is the part that I don't like. And so I would rather you leave it to the provider, let them have their own judgment, because when we submit the application, we basically attest to you guys that we would be monitoring them. We would tell you how we would do that, right? But if you were to say something more relaxed, then it put a hardship on us, because when I am talking and teaching, I devoted the duty of monitoring to another person that look at all the participants. If they step out for a few minutes, fine. But if they exceed a certain time, we would send them a chat message that, where are you? You got to check back on. So that is how we monitor our webinar. We want a high standard. We don't want to be, once you let one person or two person go darken the camera, go driving around, other people can see it. It would spread like cancer. I don't want to see that. Because I want to provide quality work. I mean, I don't want to have 10% driving along and other 5% shopping and then the other people are watching. That is a very bad influence. So I just want to say that I am glad that you guys are moving along in that direction. I don't know if I have time. The other comment about the, I know that what you're trying to do, you want people to revise and update it.
30 seconds.
Which I have every year. Without that, if people are legitimate and doing professional, they would update the thing. But if you don't clarify that from a viewpoint of the CE provider, if they listen to the application form as you have presented, they would think not making any change would be a better thing than to make update, because they're thinking, wow, this one has been approved. It is easier to get the approval by not changing anything, because there are certain subject, there's no change. Let's say if they're talking about MRI anatomy, there's a change. Okay, it's just basically the same thing. There's no change there. It's like teaching math.
Looking at the commenters, there are no more requests for comment at the moment. Mr.
Okay,
Packard
thank
has
you.
Provided contact information for the board.
Oh, thank you very much. And to the last, Dr. Dong, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments and feedback. We can close the panel if no one else is waiting to comment. Okay. Is there any further discussion or comments from the committee members? Agenda item 4, we have a motion on the table. It was seconded. Hearing none, Dr. Adams, would you please call the roll for the vote on the motion?
I will. Dr. Paris.
Yes.
Dr. Daniels.
Yes.
Dr. Adams is a yes. The motion carries.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 5, public comment for items not on the agenda. Just want to inform members of the public that you may address the committee at this time. Please be advised that identifying yourself is voluntary, and your name will be recorded in the official minutes of the meeting if it is provided at the time of your comment. And at this time, moderator, can we please open this agenda item for public comment?
We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 5. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Please, thank you. Moving to agenda item number 6, future agenda item. I'd like to open this for discussion by the committee. Any future agenda items?
Do we want to continue discussing the application or allowing research for continuing ed? And
yes.
Getting language around what that would look like?
Yeah, thank you. I think those two discussion topics, the CE credit to licensees for research activities, and then the further discussion on verification of attendance during live and interactive courses. I think we resolved that second part. So it would just be the first part of our anticipated discussion today, which was the CE credit to licensees for conducting research.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm still with
Unless we wanted to add to the agenda the comments that were presented, the last comment. Or did we sort of cover it?
The first comment regarding the fees, or the second comment regarding
The latter.
video, necessity for video? I think he confirmed really what
Yeah,
we,
okay.
what,
I just
yeah.
want to make sure that,
I think he was supportive of the decision we made to assure there's video teleconference. Okay, any other future agenda items from the committee? Okay. Moderator, can you please open this agenda item for public comment?
We are now accepting. My apologies. We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 6. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. I see a hand raised from Victor Tong. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning.
Hi, this is Victor Tong again. In the past, when I do research, usually it takes more than 1 year to complete the work. So I just want to make sure people are thinking about, upon the approval of the peer-reviewed journal that say that, okay, you approve, are you guys going to give the credit for the past year or the new year? Because that it is very difficult to predict how much work. When people do research, they're going to do a lot more than 1 or 2 hours if they're legitimate doing that. And how are you going to, I just want you guys to think about that timeline, that gap there, that's all. I mean, you guys are doing the right thing. It is good to have credit for research. Very few people do that. We should encourage that, but just think about that item. That's all I have. Thank you.
That's what we're going to be discussing.
Thank you for those comments. I would agree with you. It would be very difficult to capture the actual true hours spent in getting published. So thank you for that. And we will be discussing that. That is the agenda item for the future.
At the moment, there are no other requests for public comment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 7. And thank you everyone for hanging in there with us today, and Happy New Year. Glad to see us back on the 4th. So that was, thank you for that. I appreciate everybody staying a little bit over today, including all of our attendees. And at this time, I would adjourn the meeting. The time is 2:49 p.m. Thank you, everyone.